Special thanks to our promotional partners at the American Philatelic Society.
The APS is the largest stamp collecting organization in the world, supporting collectors of any level worldwide.
For more information about membership and APS services, visit stamps.org. Hi, I'm Charles Epting from H.R. Harmer in New York City.
I'm Michael Cortese of NobleSpirit in Pittsfield, New Hampshire.
And this is Conversations with Philatelists. Now, Michael, today's episode is really exciting because if I'm not mistaken, we have not had a Grand Master as appointed by the Mystery Writers of America on our show yet. I think this is the first.
Not yet. Give it a couple minutes, and then we will.
And then we will be able to say we have had a Mystery Writers of America Grand Master on our show, which should tell people that this is not a typical philatelist that we're having on today. This is not your conventional run-of-the-mill philatelist. This is an incredibly accomplished and incredibly successful novelist and author who is beloved to many non-philatelists because of his work. Why don't you tell people who haven't guessed already who we're having on today?
Or haven't read the title of the episode. Today we're talking...
If they blindly clicked on this episode.
Today we're talking to Lawrence Block.
And again, I just want to reiterate, this is a really big deal, like for non-stamp collectors as well. Yeah. This is an incredibly well-regarded mystery writer, and again, a lot of stamp collectors might know him because of
the Keller Series. He wrote 5 books and I believe a short story. The final one, Keller's Fedora, started in 1998, but it was on a serial killer who also collected stamps.
I was introduced to the Keller Series by our former shipping manager, big stamp collector. He was the one who made me aware of the Keller novels. I mean, he has plenty of other series about other very, very highly regarded characters, but Keller to stamp collectors, I think, is the obvious reference point. This is somebody we can, on the one hand, relate to, and on the other hand, not at all relate to, hopefully.
And then readers of Linn's will know him from the 2009 to 2012. He wrote 33 columns called Generally Speaking, talking about his journey really through stamp collecting, how he collects, what he was collecting at the time period, and kind of his adventures through the world of philately as it was happening.
And these columns were just recently last year collected into a bound volume so that you can get all of his Linn's columns in one place, which is fantastic for the philatelic world.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. It is on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle digital form.
Well, again, without further ado, let's bring Mr. Block on. He has been out of philately for a couple of years, he explained, but was gracious enough to accept our invitation, and I'm really excited to talk to him.
Yeah, me too. Let's bring him on in. Hi, Mr. Block.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Not bad.
So thank you so much. To kick things off, do you mind taking a little bit of time to give us your brief background on what brought you into philately and brought you into let's start with that. What brought you into philately, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Sure, I can talk about that some. I started collecting when I was a fairly young kid. I think probably my uncles had collected as kids. One of them stayed with it or went back to it and collected British Empire for the latter portion of his life. Certainly, the other didn't, and I think one of them may have given me his stamp album, or possibly not. At any rate, I started off with a modern stamp album, and a great aunt of mine was secretary to the president of Trico Corporation, a firm in Buffalo that made windshield wipers, and had a considerable international business. And she took the stamps off all the correspondence and would send them to me. She was very funny. She held her boss in very high esteem. And if there was ever a complete cover, she would make sure that she cut his name out of it so that I have no idea what she thought she was protecting him from by that, but that was a source of stamps certainly, and I collected throughout childhood and probably actively until well into high school. Anyway, I certainly stopped by the time I went to college. And then, and in fact, in high school, I specialized. I got the first of the Scott specialty albums for British Empire, the Great Britain, British Europe, and British Oceania album, and that was my focus of interest. And then I think I may still have had that when I returned to collecting, and I returned to collecting in a funny way. And that was I got very much interested in coin collecting in my early 20s, numismatics, mm-hmm. And eventually, at around age 25, I went to work for Whitman in Racine, Wisconsin, a division of Western Printing, that their coin supply division. And I edited a magazine there and did a lot of writing for it, and did other things. It was an interesting time. I was there for about a year and a half, and it was the only real job I ever had as an adult. And it taught me two surprising things. One was that I could do quite decently in a corporate environment. I'd always assumed I couldn't, but I was doing fine. In fact, they were about to promote me out of the coin supply division and into Whitman marketing in general. I found that out, and I found out also that that wasn't what I wanted to do, that what I wanted to return to writing. But while I was at Whitman, coins was what I was concerned with all day long, one way or another. So for relaxation, I went back to stamp collecting, and was collecting. I resumed my British Europe collection, and I started collecting Benelux also, and stayed with that for some years. I continued, after having departed from Whitman and moved to New Jersey. And then I guess it was 1973, my marriage broke up, and I had alimony and child support to pay, and a life that was spinning a bit out of control at the time anyway. So one of the things that I did there was sell the stamp collection. And thought about it with occasional regret, but not too much, for quite a few years. And it was sometime in the mid-1990s, I think, that I really regretted having sold the stamp collection, and I resumed collecting. And it was sometime after that I started writing the column for Linn's.
Mm-hmm. So, mid-1990s, you first published the Keller Series, which featured the stamp collecting in 98. So, right about the same kind of time, had you, in that kind of parallel, had you intended for the book to end up that way? Or was that kind of thrown in there alongside your own?
That was actually something I wanted to ask as well, because a lot of people who are stockbrokers or doctors, they can't tie their hobby in with their career. I was going to ask, at what point you thought that philately would make for an interesting facet of character development?
Sure, I can certainly talk about that, because it's a very natural question that for people to have. I started writing about Keller with a short story, which became the first chapter of Hitman, a story called Answers to Soldier. And that was written in, I think, 1989.
Oh, wow.
And And I thought, it did well. It was well received. It was nominated for an award. It was published in Playboy, which was the premium market for stories in the field. But I never thought that we'd hear more from Keller. And a couple of years went by, and I was thinking about the character, and I thought, he's the kind of urban, lonely guy who would wind up in therapy, and what would that be like? And I wrote the story Keller's Therapy, and there was another story or two, and at one point, at the end of Keller's Therapy, he wound up with a dog. The dog had formerly been the property of the therapist, who met a bad end, as it turned out, and Keller wound up with the dog. And I thought, how's a hitman who spends all of his time traveling going to cope with having a dog? So the next story after that was Dogs Walked, Plants Watered, where he meets and hires a young woman to take care of the dog. And one story led to another, and about 5 or 6 stories in, I realized I was writing a novel on the installment plan, that they very much went together, and there was a continuous flow to the narrative. Meanwhile, I had resumed collecting stamps, and I was collecting General Worldwide. And toward the end of the book, I think in maybe the 8th or 9th story of the 10 that constituted Hitman, Keller was contemplating retirement. And I thought, well, what the hell is he going to do in retirement? And I thought, well, he could collect stamps, and that was the first time this had occurred to me. And it turned out he had fond recollections of a childhood stamp collection. So he moved on into philately. And curiously enough, his collection interests mirrored my own, which was Worldwide, 1840 to 1940.
So writing the stories for that, the research for Philately must have been a bit easier, making it your own, kind of your passion as well. It kind of made the less research having to be done. Yeah.
I really didn't have to do any philatelic research specifically for the Keller stories. No, that was all at hand.
I was going to ask, when you started, obviously, when you write these stories, you have a certain non-philatelic audience in mind. These are intended for people who maybe know a little bit about stamp collecting, but who most likely are not philatelic. Did you expect to be embraced by the philatelic community the way you were? For example, I work at H.R. Harmer, an auction house. Our old shipping manager had a shelf of your books, not even just the Keller books. Those were his introduction to your work. And, from there, he went and read everything else. Did you expect for stamp collectors to embrace your stories the way they seemingly have?
I didn't really think of it. I know there was at one point where I think Michael Lawrence at Linn's reviewed the book, and in very complimentary fashion, and that was certainly nice. And then after that, I had review copies, sent to philatelic markets, figuring there might be some interest, but I didn't think about it too much. I found it gratifying that philatelists would like the books, and then of course over the years, reviews would either in the philatelic media were very complimentary, but periodically there would be reviews in other media where readers would say, you have to wade through far too much crap about stamps that and they would they would bail out there. But I think actually the general consensus among non-philatelic readers was that the parts about the stamps were interesting enough. And I know I've with Generally Speaking, which is the book that I published. That's a collection of my 33 columns for Linn's. There have been quite a few reviews on Amazon from people who say, I really don't care anything much about stamp collecting, but I found this interesting anyway, which was gratifying.
Yeah, reading it, it almost seemed like a great introductory book for people looking to learn how to collect stamps, because it's your story through stamps. It seemed like an incredible place to start. So, do you mind talking a little bit about your start writing that column at Linn's? How you got the column and your beginning with it?
Yeah, I proposed it to Michael Bodke, who was editor-in-chief at Linn's at the time, and he was favorably disposed to it, and I just started writing it, and it was funny. It was just an idea. I just thought I would enjoy doing that. And I did for almost 3 years. And then I had a column that it took me far too long to write. And I just realized one day that I was done. Mm-hmm. And I missed it the way I miss lots of things when I'm done with them. But that seems to be the way life works. I was just done.
Yeah. So at what point, because I noticed around column 23, you decided to change the way that you were writing the columns. So you went from writing, just speaking about your kind of your own thoughts, to addressing a classroom, really. What prompted that change in style there?
That was just a device. I couldn't have told you when I started using it with the column, but years before that, I did a monthly column on fiction writing for a magazine called Writer's Digest, and the idea of the class and the kids and that and the dialogue as a way of telling whatever it was I was trying to tell. I used that frequently in the column, and it just migrated into the Linn's column.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. It was almost gave it a more educational feel, which I guess is probably the point. But it was quite interesting to read those ones.
Thank you.
Something I've wondered, for as ubiquitous as stamp collecting has been for the last 150 some odd years in this country, I feel like there's relatively little representation of philately in popular culture. You have the movie Charade, of course. You have a book by Terry Pratchett. Do you feel that stamps are underrepresented in popular literature or popular culture?
Gee, I don't know. I don't know to what extent collecting and collectibles require representation in fiction and works of that sort. I know it's very frustrating and annoying to people with a specialist knowledge of the field when a writer lacking that knowledge gets something wrong.
Yeah.
And Charade was a good instance of that, certainly. I just saw part of that again. I saw it when it came out a million years ago.
Wow.
And my wife and I tried to watch it on television, within the past week or two. And we thought, gee, this is not nearly as good as we somehow remembered it. But I do recall the ending, which we didn't stick around for this time, and smuggling the stamps by using them for postage is a strange approach.
Yeah, certainly lacking the expert's opinion on that one. A lot of people, you said, ask you write in for the column to ask how they collect. Are you still getting emails from people, or are you still getting people writing into you even now with the Generally Speaking book out about the same kind of questions, people looking to you for answers on that?
I don't think I get much correspondence these days from people looking to me for philatelic answers or information.
Mm-hmm.
I still get, I do get responses to the book.
Yeah.
Occasionally, the age of email is such that writers hear far more from readers than they ever used to, and the age of Amazon reviews and all that is such that there's far more feedback on
Mm-hmm.
anything people write than you would think or would have expected in earlier times. But no, I don't think people ever look to me much as a source of answers to their questions. I mean, I have no expertise in philately, certainly.
So you gave a speech at the 2026 international show.
Michael, you keep taking the words out of my mouth.
I'm so sorry.
I was the New York 2016 show was. I don't mean to interrupt, Michael, but
No,
I
ahead,
just want I was that was right after I entered the business professionally. I'd been with HR Harmer for about a month at that point. That was sort of my first entry point into the world of international philately, and I remember your very warm reception there was a highlight that a lot of people were talking about. Did you ever expect to be speaking at an international stamp show when you first introduced Keller's connection to the hobby? And what was that experience like? What was that like for you to speak at an event like that?
It was enjoyable. It was enjoyable. I had earlier than that, a few years before, I think it must have been, I spoke at a national convention that was held in Hartford. I forget, APS, I think. And I enjoyed that also because, the people you meet are so nice. And of course, that's true almost always in any hobby setting,
Mm-hmm.
because people are at their best when they're among fellow hobbyists, as opposed to, they may be absolute cutthroat competitors in a business situation, but this is what they're doing to relax, so they get to be nice guys. But anyway, I met nothing but nice guys in stamps.
Yeah, I mean that's generally the sense that we get when we go to shows. I mean, everybody's there to mingle and to create a pleasant environment with each other. So, glad that the experience was shared by you as is felt by traditional, stamp goers, if you will. Not
Your focus, or I guess lack thereof, collecting worldwide 1840 to 1940, even with a focus on the British Empire. I feel like this is not a way that many people are collecting today. Today it feels very hyper specialized, where people are going to focus on the provisional overprints of the Falkland Islands rather than trying to fill up one of those ancient blue, big blue Scott albums. What was when you approached the hobby, what made you want to collect a little bit of everything, and what do you think the charm of collecting that way is, again, versus the hyper specialization that has sort of, I think, come up more recently in the hobby?
Well, one thing, and I think I mentioned this in an early column. It's taken directly from the world of academia. and that's that a generalist is someone who learns less and less about more and more until he knows nothing about everything, whereas a specialist is someone who learns more and more about less and less until he knows everything about nothing. And that's kind of the choice you get in stamps as well. You can concentrate, you can have a very narrow focus or a very broad one. When I decided to go back to collecting, and I remember it was on a trip to Ireland, and I had a dream in which my wife sold my stamp collection or something like this. Now, I didn't have a stamp collection at the time, and I realized that it was I who had stolen my stamp collection. It was a long time ago, and that I really could start collecting again if I wanted to. So that was when I decided to return to it. But I had to decide what to collect. And I started off by collecting just Ireland. I collected that for a period of some months. But that didn't feel like enough. I didn't want to specialize that narrowly. And I tried to figure out what else I could collect and what I would collect and what I wouldn't collect. And I just didn't really want to leave anything out. I found all the world's stamps interesting in about the same fashion. So I thought I would just go ahead and do that, and did. And I should say, I know I make the point in the book and have said it elsewhere, that I no longer collect, but a few years ago, I think in early 2017, though I'm not exactly certain of the date, I did make arrangements to sell my collection. I had not exactly lost interest, but I'd noticed that I wasn't buying stamps the way I had, that I wasn't seeking them out, that when I did buy stamps, it took me a long time to transfer them to the album where I wanted to have them. And this was coupled really with the fact that one thing I was able to look at was a calendar, and I realized I was reaching a time in life where, the end was visible somewhere in the distance. And I wanted to have made arrangements for the disposal of my collection before I left the stage. It seemed like a kindness to my heirs. The stamps, there wasn't a tremendous amount of money there, but the effort involved in disposing of a collection is I think, probably best carried out by the collector himself. So I have been away from the hobby for a long time. And, a few years anyway. And I thought it would be a wrench to sell everything. And it was less so than I might have imagined. A friend of mine just liquidated his collection of crime and mystery fiction, and he was the world's foremost collector. He had the best material and the largest collection, and it had been a chief focus of his life for the past 50 years. And he didn't want it to just disappear upon his death, and he figured it made sense to do this. But he said it just tore his heart out to see the books leave the house. And looking at the empty shelves is a source of abiding pain to him still, and it's been a year or two now, probably about 2 years. And I didn't have that kind of a feeling. I felt a certain amount of relief, because when I would look at the row of stamp albums in the last year or two that I had them, there was something of, they felt like a burden and a potential problem, so that when they were gone and I was compensated to whatever extent for them, I felt as though I'd checked an important item off a list. I certainly don't regret a moment of the time I spent in the world of philately. And I still find written material on the subject of interest, but I don't have the urge to acquire. And that last, I think, I see in other areas too. And I just know it's age related. My wife and I, for years, would go to antique shops and we would feel an urge to acquire and that. And then there was just a point where the desire to acquire anything was gone. And that happens, not to everyone, I'm sure, but it does happen, and I think it's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you speak in, there's all different kinds of collectors, and you speak in a lot of the earlier columns about how you felt that the search for stamps really was your main drive for collecting, and not necessarily the completion of countries. And I remember in one column specifically, I forget the country, but you said that you'd walked into an auction house and ended up buying an entire country in one sitting, and completed it. You brought it home and you affixed all the stamps into the book, and then thought, okay, well, what now? And then the deep dive into inverted over prints and different kind of errors, it was not something that you were. I think your column said, and probably you can elaborate yourself on your own collecting habits, but I think it said that you weren't looking to dive that deeply into those areas in philately. So going down that road, once you kind of scratch the surface of absolutely everything, 1840 to 1940, and if you're looking for the chase, if you will, I can understand how once you feel like there's that sort of sense of accomplishments, you've got most of everything that you can get, it becomes time to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, well, my collection certainly never became comprehensive enough so that was a factor. Mm-hmm. But it is certainly true that whatever you're collecting, stamps or anything else, there's a satisfaction in acquiring. There's a compulsion to complete a collection, an area of a collection. But at the same time, there's a finality about that completion that kills your interest in that area.
Yeah.
All right, I now have all the stamps from whatever, and that's 2 pages in my album that I no longer have any reason to look at.
Right.
So it's empty spaces are an important aspect of the whole business.
Yeah. It's almost like the stamps you don't have are what are driving you to collect stamps.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to ask something a little bit, I don't know if obtuse is the right word, but something a little bit strange. The character of Keller is different than you or I or most people who read him. He's he partakes in behavior that most of us will never hopefully experience firsthand. What do you the fact that
do you mean by virtue of the fact that he's the general collector?
Exactly what I was going to ask, when you have somebody involved in this world who also does something so relatable and universal as collect stamps, what sort of psychological importance do you ascribe to that hobby? Do you think there's something that is shared between being a good hitman and being a good philatelist.
No, I don't think so. I think one of the things that makes Keller interesting for me is that he's very much like most people, except for the ways in which he's not. In other words, he kills people for a living, and manages to do that essentially without remorse. But in other respects, he's a perfectly fine fellow, and ethical in other areas of his life. I know there's one exchange he has with Dot where he worries whether or not he's a sociopath, and that's an interesting question. And the response a lot of people have is that, if you are a sociopath, you don't worry about it. But that's not necessarily the case. I know the crime writer Charles Willeford was a friend of mine, and he wrote in one of his, he wrote 2 volumes of memoir, and in one of them, he talks about the fact that he himself, he has self-diagnosed himself as a sociopath, and talks about that some. And if so, he was certainly a sociopath who never engaged in any discernible antisocial behavior, and who functioned well, and who certainly operated ethically. But there was something that's discernible in his memoir and in the kinds of characters he wrote about that suggests his diagnosis was probably correct. So all of these subjects involving people are complicated, and thumbnail definitions usually miss something. So this is probably putting too fine a point on it, but Keller is Keller is like you or I would be if at an early age we'd been recruited to be professional killers and turned out to be good at it.
So the bug for collecting kind of doesn't have in your sense, have a thing it snaps onto for someone's unique personality. It's just something that anybody at any point can have, and they just need to be looking for something, searching.
I think so. I think some people, and it frequently manifests itself at a very early age, desire to collect. And the nature of the object collected may change many times over the years. It may get larger and smaller and all that, but they're born collectors. And there are other people who are not. My response from a very early time, if I saw something that I liked and that I wanted to own, I almost immediately wanted to own another that was like it but different, And why not get all of them? That kind of thing. That's the collecting node, and not everybody has it.
So have you moved on to another form of collecting since philately?
No, and I not at all. And other things that I sort of collected, not very ardently, I haven't bothered with either. So no, as I said, I think it's age related, and it's a recent book in the Keller Series that I write, the most recent one, I used as a title a phrase from the book of Ecclesiastes. I called it "A Time to Scatter Stones," and that seems to fit with collecting. There's a time to gather stones together, and there's a time to cast them away.
So, looking back on your time as a philatelist, was there anything that you remember escaping you, something that you wish you had, or at least maybe the last thing you were looking to purchase before you decided to sell your collection?
No, I don't think so.
Hmm.
I can't think of anything. I would just, I just enjoyed filling spaces.
Yeah, yeah. This is the purest form of the hobby,
Yeah.
and it's when you get down
Ultimately,
to it,
how we all start, and
yeah,
it's ultimately what it all boils down to.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's the coding of a collector.
I just want to thank you, Mr. Block, for joining us again. We've really
Yeah.
enjoyed this, and again, I remember your talk at New York 2016. That's one of those. Again, I was really the beginning of my career, so I measure everything on either side of that. So the fact that Michael and I have a podcast now and we're able to speak to you, it feels like
Yeah.
things are coming full circle for me.
Oh, well, that's great. That's great. I've enjoyed this. I have been turning down podcast invitations of one sort or another regularly of late, but this is the first philatelic one that had turned up, and I thought it would probably be something I'd enjoy, and that anyway, I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. Well, thank
We
you.
we
Thank
really
you so
appreciate
much.
it.
I just wanted to ask what are you working on now? What is next for you? Are you working on another piece or another book or another writing for a journal?
Well, I say I'm essentially retired, but you'd think if I were, I would spend fewer hours sitting at my computer than I do. I do have a book coming out June 24th on my birthday,
Oh wow.
and it's called A Writer Prepares. And it's a memoir of my first years in the business, my first years as a professional writer, first 10 or 12 years probably, through 1966 or 7. And I don't know if this will be interesting or not, but it's a book that I started writing in 1994. I was at a writer's colony called Ragdale. I had stalled on a book I was working on. I had more time to spend there. And I suddenly started writing something I'd not planned on writing at all. Right, I started writing about my beginnings in the business and all the books I wrote under pen names and that in those early years. And it was an uncanny experience because every time I started writing, I would be writing something that I hadn't thought about in years. And as I was writing, some doors would flick open in my memory and send me off on something else. And I wrote about 50,000 words of this in 8 days.
Wow.
Just top speed. And I brought it home, and I figured it was about, half a book or close to it, the way this would wind up. And I didn't do anything. And then my agent included it in a multi-book contract that I made with my then regular publisher. And a couple of years went by during which I didn't even look at it. And I realized that I wasn't going to finish this, that I was done. I didn't care anymore. And I bought my way back out of that contract and never looked at the book again until about a year and a half ago, when I found it in the closet, and it didn't require a deep search. I knew exactly where it was, but I took it out and looked at it because a fellow I knew, was composing putting together a bibliography of my work. And I told him about it and showed it to him. And I realized it was something I ought to finish, I couldn't explain why I'd abandoned it, that it looked really fine to me, but how do I pick it up 25 years later? Well, I did, and I worked on it off and on throughout 2020, and it's finished. And the book is called A Writer Prepares, and I'll be bringing it out in, as I said, June 24th.
That's a fantastic story to a book. Wow.
It was so much of my life is composed of things that in retrospect I cannot make head or tail out of.
Yeah. That's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing this with us and taking the time out. It really is quite an honor that you take the time out to I feel like we've been selected, if you will, as
Well, it's been a pleasure, and send me a link and I'll let the world know about it when it's up.
Oh, thank you so much.
We'd appreciate that very much.
Really. Thank you so much, Mr. Block. This has been fantastic.
Thank you both.
So, Michael, I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a great chat. I mean it when I remember his appearance at New York 2016 being one of the highlights of that show for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. It was great for them to bring him in as this, sort of force outside of mainstream philately. Here's somebody from the fiction world who presented at the show. I thought that was really fun and had that left an impact on me. And the fact that we were able to speak to him is really special.
Yeah, and it does kind of rattle true that the entire philatelic community just reveres him entirely, and they think that the works they're terrific, and they love the fact that there's a representation in modern literature from an actual philatelist representing what he talked about philately accurately.
Absolutely,
it's not something that happens.
I find it funny that he mentioned us in one of his newsletters when we asked him to be, and I got multiple notes from people, philatelists who are subscribed to his newsletter because they follow his works because of that philatelic. He really opened himself up to a much wider audience by slipping in, Keller's stamp collection. But the one thing I wish I'd asked him, he used pseudonyms for a lot of his early novels because the content maybe wasn't something he wanted his name attached to. And it's just shocking to me that he used his real name for the stamp collecting books, because most people would want to, I feel like, distance themselves from that. If most critically acclaimed writers wrote about stamps, they would definitely use a pen name to keep people off their scent. So it's amazing that he actually put his name on Philately.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people do greatly appreciate that, and he spoke a little bit about the representation of philately and other collectibles in pop culture, and it's not something that generally happens. So I think that the philatelic community has really latched on to him because they're grateful for the representation that they've had in his books.
They see themselves in this sociopathic, cold-blooded killer. Can all relate to that.
Yeah.
Michael, I really enjoyed this episode. Thank you for setting this one up. This was, a lot of these people we both know, or we sort of kick it back and forth. This one you thought up and you reached out to Lawrence, and I've really got to thank you for arranging this one because it was fantastic.
Yeah, actually, I'm
going to clarify that for our listeners. Michael sets up about 95% of these interviews. I've done like 2 or 3. So, Michael, I'm giving you credit for this one, but you deserve credit for all of them.
Well, this one actually, I may have emailed him, but the idea came from a listener of ours. We actually got an email in and said, love your show. Have you considered writing to Lawrence Block? A lot of us would like to hear from him. So I reached out to him.
Well, okay, then I rescind the credit I gave to you. Perfect. And I'll give the credit to our anonymous listener.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want. I want no credit for anything we're doing at all. Speaking of...
On that note...
I am going to now use a pseudonym to detach myself from this show.
Where do we go from there? Michael, as always, a lot of fun. People watching us on YouTube, you can find us on all the podcast services, Google, Apple, Spotify, you name it. People listening to us can watch our interviews, including Mr. Lawrence Block on YouTube, where you can see us sitting in our offices. Yeah. You can subscribe on YouTube, though, because that's how success is measured in the year 2021. Is by YouTube subscribers. Michael, honestly, though, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google, we have an email, philatelypodcast@gmail.com.
Yep.
We have a website, philatelypodcast.com.
Yep.
You can write to us at that email, or I'm sure that email's on our website as well. So we love hearing from you. As always, really enjoyed this. And until next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it, and we'll see you next week.
Talk to you real soon.
All right. Bye-bye.